Welcome to Your Education Matters, now in our 5th year as a source of information about British Columbia education. Your Education Matters features the voices of professional educators and other education stakeholders. Today our guest is UBC's Dean of the Faculty of Education, Dr. Blye Frank. Blye Frank is an educational leader as well as a scholar and advocate for social justice and equity. Dr. Frank is a professor and administrator who leads a large graduate faculty of education which prepares many hundreds of teachers each year and wins international prominence for its research and scholarship. Prior to his current appointment, Dr. Frank was head of the Division of Medical Education at Dalhousie University in Halifax. Dr. Frank himself has an active research agenda, currently focused on masculinity and health. Dean Frank led the Exemplary Schools Project, as well as serving with other educational development initiatives in Asia and Africa. Dr. Frank earned his PhD from Dalhousie University. His prior degrees are from Arcadia University. Blye Frank has been recognized for his work in teaching and human rights. We are pleased to welcome Dean Blye Frank of UBC's Faculty of Education to Your Education Matters. Thank you for thinking about Your Education Matters. Dean Frank, I know that your faculty's been involved in a redesign of teacher education over the last couple years, and I'd like you to talk about some of the things that you've been trying to incorporate, the changes that are being made, and what your vision is of an optimal teacher education program.
Well, thank you, Paul. Yes, the Faculty of Education at UBC actually has been working for about 8 years for a revised program at the bachelor's level. And we've taken in our first group of students this past September, 520 students into the revised program. And I'd like to talk about at least 3 initiatives within that program. First of all, we have a mandatory course in Aboriginal and Indigenous education that all students graduating from the program must take, which I think is certainly a move forward in the context of British Columbia and more widely nationally and internationally. Secondly, we've really attempted to make a shift in the language even that we use from talking about the training of teachers for K-12 to the education of educators. So what we recognized there again a number of years ago that many of our graduates gained employment in areas other than public school classrooms in this province. So we have made mandatory what we're calling an extended or an enhanced practicum, that every student graduating from our Bachelor of Education program will continue to do a practicum in a British Columbia school to meet the requirements of the ministry in terms of certification. But in addition to that, every student will do a placement in what we're calling a learning site, a community-based learning site other than a school. So for example, that might be the Vancouver Aquarium, might be Science World, might be a number of different museums, it might be the YWCA, and that will actually provide our students with an experience other than that K-12 situation, so that they have the opportunity to seek and gain employment other than in the public system. And the third thing I want to mention about the revised program, that it's actually an inquiry-based program. So we're very intent on bringing a research base and a research quality to that Bachelor of Education program rather than simply preparing people with a skill set to work in educational sites.
And the academic preparation for the candidates for education credentials, they range widely across many majors, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So of course all students coming into the Bachelor of Education program generally would have a first bachelor degree, usually a 4-year undergraduate degree. And then our program is a 12-month program beyond that. There are some variations to that. And they certainly would range across a number of subject areas and preparational areas for the public school system.
You know, we call it pre-service education, what teachers receive before they go out for their first job, but I know you're concerned about the whole spectrum of professional development experiences a teacher receives. Can you help our audience understand what are appropriate goals for a person coming out of undergraduate experience and what things come later and through other professional development experiences for a teacher?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for asking that question, because I mean, I think all of us in education would want to think about an overworked term perhaps, but lifelong learning. So we would see that that 12-month preparation for teachers is a beginning. So that we would hope that a commitment on the part of professionals in general would be to lifelong learning, including those coming into the teaching profession. So we've recently created within the Faculty of Education a new unit. The unit's called Professional Development and Community Engagement, and we've appointed an assistant dean to that unit. And that is purposely to focus upon the ongoing professional development of educators, not just teachers within the public school system. And so we would have many educators, teachers, who are interested in ongoing professional development, not necessarily interested in doing a master's degree and or a PhD or an EDD, but they do want to continue to be involved in their own learning. And so we're helping, I hope, to create those spaces, to make that information available to districts and boards and individual teachers throughout the province and the nation and internationally.
Are there things we could learn from the medical education model of continuing education for professionals?
Well, in my opinion, yes. I had a long career in education, including in public education as a classroom teacher for 17 years, before doing graduate work and then working in schools and faculties of education. And then I dipped out to a faculty of medicine, as you indicated in the introduction, for a decade. And I was involved in the education of undergraduate medical students and residents and faculty within a medical faculty. And I worked in at least 10, if not more, of the 17 medical schools in the country, so did a fair amount of work within faculties and schools of medicine. And yes, I am particularly interested in this notion of competency-based education. Now, I know there's a huge debate, theoretically, politically, and so on. And I would hope that we'd be able to maintain a huge degree of autonomy and flexibility within a competency-based education. In medicine, for example, for all residents, there's a competency base called the CAN-MEDS, which includes 7 competencies, only one of which is medical expert. Others might be accountability, communication, and so on. So it interests me not just about the standards coming forth from the ministry, which faculties of education and BED programs must meet. I'd be interested in the national debate about what it might look like to have a competency-based framework, at least, for all schools and faculties of education who are graduating potential teachers to the system. And we then, as has happened, but I think that would be an interesting national debate. The other thing that concerns me is, and I know this is also a hot political issue, but what is it that ensures the quality, the commitment to lifelong learning? So, you know, I'll use my medical example again. If I was to end up in a merge, I would hope that the physician who was on duty that evening would have been involved in professional development over his or her career. So I'll give a specific example. For teachers who graduate from teacher education programs in this province and may work in other professions or other areas before their entry into teaching, and for some people that's a fairly long wait, including for teachers on call in this province, what is the, and I'll use the word which will be controversial, but what is the mandatory requirement between that space of graduating and entering the profession, if it's 5 to 7 years later, of doing professional development to maintain one's competency, if you will, for entry to the profession? So I think we'd agree that we wouldn't want a physician who was working for industry for 7 years following graduation and residency, and 7 years later entering a profession and not having done any professional development in that space. So I think there are lots of things that can be raised in relation to the ongoing lifelong learning and professional commitment of teachers.
Well, there's been a good bit of change in the air around teacher education in the province because of the demise of the College of Teachers. Do the new arrangements by the provincial government have much impact on the redesign you've been working with? Do they support it, favor it, or is that part of the structure fairly neutral in terms of what you and the faculty have been trying to do?
Well, we're very aware of ministry requirements. So I'm used to, for example, the language, it may be, and I'm recently new to British Columbia, but I'm used to the language of the ministry requiring a certain number of teachables, as we would call it. That's that a student is prepared with a knowledge base in areas that are taught in the public school. I'm used to, as we have here, standards set forth that teachers coming from teacher education programs must meet. So we want to be clear, particularly with the public, that what we do at a university in teacher education and offering a Bachelor of Education, the University of British Columbia awards the degree. We do not at a university certify teachers. I think there's a lot of confusion by some people about this. The ministry certifies teachers. So I think certainly for me personally, as a dean, ethically, I want us to be responsible that all of our students would meet the requirements for certification in the province of British Columbia. And we are doing that. And I don't think that in any way is overly binding. It's an ethical responsibility, and hopefully those standards have been worked out collaboratively, surely between districts, the ministry, the Federation, and faculties and schools of education would be my favorite design of what constitutes standards for a profession. In addition to that, however, it is the university that has jurisdiction over the content of a program in a degree. Now, I would hope there again that we would work collaboratively, and certainly our programs are reviewed in terms of meeting the standards, and I think that's a good thing. But the university has the autonomy to design the program. Once again, I want to say hopefully that in an ethical approach, we would always want our students to meet the standards. And then finally, I would say that I hope those standards are worked out collaboratively.
Okay, thank you. We'll be back in a moment.
I'm ready. I want the adventure. I saw an SFU presentation back in my high school in Italy, and after a lot of research, I decided to enroll in the mechatronics program. And you know what? 3 years later, here I am working on my robots. Being in a cohort program such as TechOne was a great opportunity to make friends, and some of those friendships are still lasting nowadays. I think it's really important to try things out before you actually commit to them. And my co-op experience really helped me decide what I was going to do in life. SFU is not only a place where you learn, but also a place where you can share ideas and really grow as an individual. In my first year, I was looking for clubs at SFU, and I found Engineers Without Borders. It really changed my perspective on things, and after that, I also ended up changing my major. So now I'm in my third year in engineering physics, and after taking a TA position, I really discovered a love for teaching. What I want in my life is really more than just work. I want to take on some projects in Latin America, I want to travel, and I definitely see teaching in my future. A complete life.
Welcome back. Blye, I would like you to tell the audience about the themes that you explore in your research. I found it very interesting when I was preparing for this program. So would you give us a description of the focal points of your work?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. I'm going to take us back a number of years ago. My first year of teaching was actually in the fall of 1969. I think that means 43 years ago. And I was actually teaching in a large junior-senior high school. And I was teaching grade 8 mathematics. And in those days, the classes were streamed by IQ. And I was teaching grade 8 FGHIJ. And the people who scored the highest on the IQ were in 8A, and so on. So it gives you a context of where I was and what I was doing at that time. And as a teacher then, I was not educated, trained to actually think about issues of social class, poverty, gender, race. It just wasn't part of a teacher education program in 1966, 67, 68. And it wasn't long, however, before I noticed that what we might say, and I say this in quotes, but the lower the stream, the poorer the kids. And then I noticed that the lower the stream, the more boys. And this caused me a lot of concern and began to take me down a road academically in terms of reading in the scholarship and the research in this area. And I first think I noticed in the research that, and in my everyday experience, that people who came from economically disadvantaged backgrounds didn't do very well in school. Now, that's not rocket science, but in 1969, for me as a new teacher, who came with a kind of training that said you treat everyone the same, that's what good teachers do. That's what it means to be fair. And of course, now we recognize that if we treat all students the same, then we actually maintain the inequities between students. So we'll jump forward a long way that I then began to think about and write about how it is in education that we take difference into account. And I've actually written quite forcefully about notions of multiculturalism. Now, let me be clear, including with your audience, that I am not at all opposed to multicultural education. However, you know, I have been known, and I certainly have published work in medical education as well. I sort of call this the mix and stir theory, that we all need one of them and one of them and one of them, and we'll teach everyone to love and care about each other and the world will be fine. That actually doesn't really address serious issues of assessment and evaluation in relation to difference, serious issues of curriculum and what's included in curriculum and who's excluded and so on. So I could talk at length about this. I say, you know, in education, we actually favor the 4 Ds. You know, first we get them dressed up in their costumes. The rest of us have clothing. Then we get them cooking for us. The second D, diet. The third D, if you can have people do a little dance on top of it. And then if you can get them speaking in that interesting dialect that we find so exotic, we have the 4 Ds of multiculturalism. We can send them home, and a week from Friday we'll have another group in. Now let me say again, I am not opposed to that, but that's actually not a social justice model. It's not a model of taking difference into account. So that sort of got me going in my own research career. When I did a PhD, I did it in the area of masculinity, boys, and schooling, because I was also interested that the question of boys was coming forward as what I might call a monolithic category. And dare I say, if you look at the numeracy and literacy scores of sons from professionally educated households, so in other words, if we look at middle class and upper middle class boys in the public school system, their literacy and numeracy scores are not falling behind. So the question then, as soon as we asked which boys, in this province certainly our boys of Aboriginal background, if we look at some boys who are disadvantaged by rurality or living in certain areas, if we look at boys who are disadvantaged economically, then you begin to get a whole different picture of this issue that's being presented as the poor boys are falling behind. So this led me then to the issue of diversity within the boy category, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I've done a fair amount of work around that. Okay. So I then moved, and I had some pretty significant major research grants from the Social Science Humanities Council. That was when I was in education. I then moved to medical education. And I began to look at the research in men and boys within medicine in a kind of broad way. And of course, a statistic which I think lots of people are aware of is that men in Canada, of the 15 leading causes of death, men die of 14 of those first in relation to women. Now, I think we really need to be quite careful about always positioning men in relation to women. I have some caution about doing that. But I also want to recognize that the health issues within the category of men, and then we could begin to do the same diversification there. But if you look at the suicide rate among young men, if you look at the suicide rate around or with Canadian veterans who are returning from war zones, if you look at the rate of prostate cancer, if you look at the risk-taking behaviors that young men and men, so there are some very serious health concerns, determinants of health, and so on that we are just beginning to recognize and address within the kind of category of men and the health of men. I'll say one final thing about it. My argument in my own work is unless you take the kind of concept of masculinity into account and what it means to be a man, then we're never going to successfully address the issue. So one kind of marker, we men, we have this kind of joke on the inside sometimes in medicine that men don't go near a physician until they're dead. So even that is clearly for me, in my analytical frame, tied to masculinity and what it means to be a man. So in all of these kinds of approaches to men's health, I would argue that you've got to have a very clear analysis of what it means to be a man if we're going to address these health concerns of boys and men.
There are implicit values, sometimes explicit in what you're talking about. How are the schools doing at culturing values that would lead a young man to constructively enter manhood? Mm-hmm.
I think there's a recognition and a concern in education, including in public education, including with individual teachers and districts and at the provincial level. Many provinces have had a kind of an investigation and documents produced in relation to boys in schooling. Certainly a lot of professional development on the issue. My concern is always, unless those individual teachers, districts, and ministries say, which boys, then we're pouring money into a kind of global approach. And I'm in no way suggesting that, all boys don't count. All boys count, right? It's not that issue. But, we're back to the question of what are the inequities within the category of boys. So I think that there's a recognition in the Canadian context, just the way there is in health. So, we have the major funders in health is the Canadian Institute of Health Research, and there's a research institute on gender and health. And we say, jokingly, just recently they discovered that boys and men exist, right? So that we know that gender's usually meant women. So I think it's now on the radar screen and on the map, both in education and in medicine.
Thank you very much. We'll be back in a moment. Policymakers and pundits focus on teacher education when they wish to describe how to improve the teacher corps. My career is focused on the preparation of teachers, but I recognize that attracting and holding great teachers goes far beyond what we do during their college years. It may make winning journalism or politics to speak always and only about who enters teaching and how they receive their initial license, but the truth about quality is much more complex. Pre-service teacher education, what students receive prior to their first appointment, is the foundation for their career. In the best of worlds, we would have induction programs that mentor new teachers into the profession over the first several years of their appointment. For economic reasons, such programs are rarely offered. Next, in order for teachers to flourish, we need to have a work environment of collegiality, stability, and societal respect. As people persons or humanists, most teachers respond to such human factors. We need middle-class compensation, commensurate with what comparably educated professionals have. Finally, surveys of BC teachers say that the other highly important factor is whether the conditions for success are present in the school. That is, whether class size and composition and the availability of specialist teacher support is sufficient. Another aspect is whether childhood poverty is adequately addressed so that children come to school ready to learn. Finally, a career and professional development ladder helps retain the best of our teachers over the duration of their careers. Advanced study and opportunities for growth and leadership allow a teacher to amplify and express their growth as a professional. We aren't so far away from meeting these criteria in BC, but clearly there are changes that need to be made. Thank you for thinking about Your Education Matters. Visit our archive at youreducationmatters.ca.